Hello and welcome to KGN News Barbados. I am AI Kirk. The Barbados government presented its budget or financial statement and budgetary proposals on Monday, March 16, 2026, just about 5 weeks after the February 11th general election. In this video, Dr. Alden Tull does a comprehensive review of the budget presentation, a deep dive into one of the more interesting proposals, and sets the stage for upcoming KGN Budget 2026 updates.
Hello and welcome to KGN News Barbados. The budget speech, or to use its full name, the financial statement and budgetary proposals, is much more than what most people make of it. Many see it as purely about the perplexing topic of economics. Others see it simply as what the government has to offer by way of tax relief. However, if we treat Barbados as though it were a limited company, we can approach the budget from the much broader and more enlightened perspective of management rather than economics only. The budget would then be seen as a full management review of the financial health of Barbados plc or Barbados Inc. That is the approach I intend to take in reviewing this year's budget, and for two very good reasons. First of all, since we are once again without an opposition in Parliament, we, the citizens, need to understand, even more than ever, what the budget is about, so we can judge for ourselves whether and how it benefits us and the country. The second reason is that treating it this way, we can get the opportunity to enhance the financial literacy of our citizens so that they can begin to understand not only the budget speech, but hopefully make sense of their own finances. So let's dive in. It is important to be aware that the budget is talking to different audiences or different stakeholders at the same time. In the same way that the managers, employees, partners, creditors, and the customers are all audience for the financial reports of a company, so too the managers of the country, the citizens, the trading partners, the creditors, and international organizations are audiences of the financial management review of Barbados plc. So it follows that the budget will have more than one purpose because it is aimed at these different audiences. It is a fact, however, that those purposes tend to overlap, so that focusing on one aspect of the budget to the exclusion of others is not the best way to understand it. What then are those purposes to which we are referring? We can identify at least 6 purposes of the national budget. Number one, first of all, the budget is supposed to provide us, its citizens, with financial and other benefits to enhance our quality of life as well as build confidence in the economic and social system of the country. Confidence in the economic system basically means having the assurance that there will be a job or other opportunities for us to make a living and to feed our families. If you and I do not have that confidence, we will spend less and save more if we can, which will definitely create a problem for the entire economy over time. The opposite is also true. Number two, second purpose of the budget is to support and inspire confidence in the private sector. If the private sector does not have this support and confidence, it is unlikely to invest more in its businesses or employ more individuals. Indeed, it may lay off workers or shut down operations in the country, as we begin to see happening already. Number three, the third purpose of the budget is to provide investors and lenders with the infrastructure and level of confidence that persuades them that investing in and lending to Barbados is a prudent risk. It is a strategy most countries across the world employ. If investors do not have this infrastructure and confidence, they will shun investing in Barbados, and which would eventually lead to less job opportunities for us as citizens. The fourth purpose of the budget is to explain how the government's policies will advance and or enhance the development or well-being of the society as a whole. But it is important to understand that development or well-being does not refer to money and material things only. Even economists recognize that issues such as safety, quality of life, satisfaction, and quality of the environment are also important aspects of development. Number five, The fifth purpose of the budget is to make a connection to the estimates, which, as you know, are debated before the budget speech. In other words, the budget should help citizens and other audiences understand how the government intends to stay within its own estimates of revenue and expenditure. That is the basic reason for having the estimates come before the budget. However, in recent budgets, including this one, it has not been at all easy to trace this connection because successive ministers of finance seem to be taking the position that the estimates and the budget are two separate and independent exercises. On that point, I want to remind you that we at KGN exposed a significant error in the estimates in our video published on March the 9th. It had to do with the amount estimated for general public services. Regrettably, on further examination since then, we found a similar type of error in the expenditure line entitled Social Protection. This means that the published total expenditure for 2026-27 in Table 4 is incorrect and represents an increase, not a decrease, in expenditure, as the negative sign misleadingly suggests. We hope the authorities will correct these errors in their revised estimates. But the fact that nothing was said about these errors in the budget speech says a lot about the disconnect between the estimates debate and the budget speech and the level of competence of individuals in the Ministry of Finance. It also helps us to appreciate the frequent criticisms leveled at government's accounting practices by the former Auditor General. Number 6. The sixth and last purpose of the budget is to shape or impact economic growth. As some of you already know, economic growth is highly related to the matter of development. By impact economic growth, we mean this. Will the budget increase or reduce economic growth? Will it encourage or discourage it? Speed it up or delay it? And what do we mean by the term growth itself? Economic growth is a controversial topic, and we don't want to become too technical here. So let's try to simplify it. The typical definition of economic growth is that it is the increase in a country's real GDP or gross domestic product over a period of time, usually 1 year. But what is gross domestic product? It is the dollar value of the finished goods and services produced domestically, that is, within the nation's borders. Putting the two previous statements together, we can describe economic growth as the increase or decrease in the value of the finished goods and services produced within a nation's borders. So for the purposes of our discussion here, Barbados GDP is the total dollar value of the goods and services produced in Barbados. Here are a few examples just to put some flesh or practical meaning on that explanation. The total dollar amount of ketchup produced in Barbados is part of the GDP of Barbados. The total dollar amount of paint produced by the paint companies in Barbados is part of our GDP. So also is the dollar value of crops grown and produced in the agricultural sector. But services are also included in GDP. Therefore, the value of the food services produced by Chefette and other restaurants is part of the GDP. So too the dollar value of the insurance policies written by insurance companies. In fact, worldwide, insurance premiums account for 7.1% of the world's economic activity, which is more than the GDP of several individual countries. Of course, measuring GDP itself is a very complex matter, best left to technical persons trained for the job. All of us, however, in some form or fashion, contribute to GDP. But let's move on to the question of growth in GDP. In the budget, you often hear about GDP growth, which basically means the change in GDP between two consecutive years. Growth in GDP is important to all of us for two main reasons. First of all, positive growth means increased employment opportunities for individuals, all other things being equal. We say all other things being equal because if that growth depends on technology rather than labor, the level of employment, will be limited. So when the government talks about developing AI or artificial intelligence, we have to wonder if that will create new jobs or simply replace humans. On the other hand, negative GDP growth or decline in GDP will not only reduce employment, but also dampen consumer spending, which in turn can reduce the quantity of goods and services produced. That is a knock-on effect that economists often talk about. Second, growth in GDP is important because it increases the government's corporation tax base. In other words, the more companies grow, the greater the overall amount of tax revenue the government can collect from companies. It follows that the opposite is also true. But how does one measure GDP growth? That, as a separate exercise for measuring GDP, turns out to be quite simple in fact. If the total dollar value of all economic entities in Barbados increases in 1 year over the previous year, that would be defined as an increase in GDP or positive GDP growth. On the other hand, if the GDP decreases in 1 year compared to the previous year, that would be recorded as negative growth. The change is usually expressed as a percentage, either a percentage increase or a percentage decline. Measuring the percentage change is much easier than you may think, as the following examples show. So in example 1, the GDP in year 1 is $50, and in year 2 it is $52. Then the percentage increase is $2 over 50 multiplied by 100, or 4%. On the other hand, if the GDP in year 1 was $50, and in year 2 it fell to $45, then the decrease is minus $5 over $50 by 100, or minus 10%. Common sense suggests that the GDP in Barbados would have decreased considerably in the COVID-19 years 2019 to 2022. We turn now to the budget speech proper. Its full name is the Financial Statement and Budgetary Proposals. As the name suggests, it consists of two elements. Number 1, the financial statement, and number 2, the budgetary proposals, in that order. It seems that the Minister of Finance, Mr. Strawn, is not clear about this because we referred to it the other way around, that is, as the budgetary proposals and financial statement. The difference does matter. For those unfamiliar with accounting, the first element, financial statement, would be a report on the country's performance with respect to revenue and expenditure, as well as its financial status or balance sheet for the previous financial year. In this case, the previous financial year is 2025 to 2026. Now, it is true that we can get some idea of that financial performance from the annual estimates. In effect, that is what we did in our first video on the estimates on March the 9th. But it was the duty of the Minister of Finance to at least summarize that performance first before moving on to the budgetary proposals. All things considered, the Minister of Finance did a poor job in this area of the budget speech. Perhaps it was because too much time was spent at the beginning on irrelevant issues, namely the recent election. In fact, our review of the video recording indicates that Mr. Strawn wasted about 30 minutes on the recent general election at the beginning of the speech. That sin of commission was compounded at the end of the budget speech with Mr. Strawn's personal stories, again, arising from the election campaign. That accounted for about another 20 minutes. In fact, so unusual was Mr. Strawn's ending that the Deputy Prime Minister commented on it. Altogether, Mr. Strawn expended nearly 1 hour of the budget speech on irrelevant matters, party propaganda, repetition, and his own soul-searching. Of course, one could argue that Mr. Strawn was simply following the pattern of his dear leader, who in previous budgets wasted valuable time in posturing and grandstanding. So much for government efficiency.
Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be a sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or fail. Be the best of whatever you are. If you can't fly, run. If you can't run, walk. If you can't walk, crawl. But by all means, sir, keep moving. May God continue to bless Barbados. And Mr. Speaker, with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you. Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In a very unprecedented ending to this evening, we will close. We will suspend until tomorrow morning at 9:30 a.m.
When we come back in part 2, we will deal with the budgetary proposals themselves. I will do a selective focus on unprecedented proposals, which, if implemented, would see a reduction in the cost of 3 categories of imports to Barbadians. Thank you for viewing.
Thank you for viewing our podcast. If you found this video informative, please do like and share. Also, if you have not done so, remember to subscribe to this channel, because it encourages us to make more informative videos like this one. Thank you and see you in the next video.